Welcome to the Acronym podcast, the only B2B marketing podcast where we don't care about CPLs, MQLs, and SQLs, and instead I'm going to be sitting down with the industry's top thought leaders, business owners, and entrepreneurs to uncover how they were able to build the confidence to make the leap into entrepreneurship and ultimately break free of those golden handcuffs. I'll also be discussing my own story, scaling a multiple six-figure marketing agency in under 12 months, and hope to be able to inspire the next generation of digital marketers to make that leap into entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Chris Roach. In today's episode, I'm joined by Morgan Smith, who's the managing director of Aligned. He's a personal friend, and I've watched him scale his company over the last 12 months. In this episode, we're going to discuss how he managed to break out of the corporate handcuffs and start his own business, some of the biggest hurdles that he's faced, and ultimately the advice he would give a marketer who's looking to make the leap themselves. Let's jump into the episode. So, Morgan, can you tell me a little bit about your background and what exactly it is that Aligned does?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. My background is mostly in brand strategy, and I actually got started as a website designer and did email marketing for B2C companies back in like 2009, 2010. I decided I was in school at the time and I didn't want to wait tables. So I thought, well, I'll freelance. So I freelanced. And over the years, eventually became and did brand strategy work and sort of have folded that into this practice at Aligned, which is a go-to-market advisory company. We consult mostly established companies who have product market fit. They usually have product marketing teams or a couple of lines of business. And they come a knocking when they've hit their initial, takeoff, and now they're trying to figure out, how do we sustain this? We've got a great product, we've got our initial customer set. How do we grow this in a way that is sustainable for the company? We call that pipeline momentum. So how do we sustain momentum in the pipeline? And as it happens, some of that is sales stuff, and some of that is marketing stuff. And my partner at Aligned, Nick, has a background in enterprise sales, a background in marketing. We put our brains together and work for these companies to help them figure out these issues.
Got you. And for those that are listening that maybe aren't as familiar with kind of the term brand strategist, what exactly does that mean, just to kind of simplify that?
It's a good question, and one I feel isn't actually asked all that often, if you think about it. I think people throw around that term like, oh, I do brand strategy. The way I think about branding is it is your business. There's really no separation between what you offer and how you go to market and your brand. They're basically synonymous in my book. So you could call it a go-to-market strategy, you could call it a brand strategy. But basically it's figuring out your positioning in the market. So compared to your competitors, why are you better? Why should people buy from you? Figuring out what you offer, how it's packaged and priced, and whether that's tailored to the third piece, which is your audience, who you serve, and what problems are they actually experiencing. Because if you can triangulate between those three different things, you've got a pretty good business case, and then you can build a brand around that. And then that comes into the more classic branding exercises of like, what does your logo look like, and what's your messaging, and what's the copy on the homepage. Those things are all, in my view at least, emanations or things that come after you determine those fundamental questions of what you offer and who you offer it to.
Got you. So it's where you're at right now. Obviously, you're on LinkedIn every day. I see you on LinkedIn every day. You have a very successful podcast. I've been a guest on the podcast. You have quite a large following. You have a successful agency. You have a business partner that's kind of gotten you to that point. Let's rewind the clock though, because the focus and the goal with this podcast is to help teach digital marketers how they can get to the point that that you're at right now, because that to me is what's lacking in the educational component. It's what's lacking in the awareness, and to be honest with you, people just don't talk about that story as often because like we mentioned before, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So let's rewind the clock to where perhaps, you talked about you were freelancing on the side, you didn't want to wait tables. I actually did the opposite. I did wait tables while I was launching my SaaS company. So I was waiting tables, working in bars. I went that route because I was like, hey, it's guaranteed, and it was cash in hand, and I'm like, this is easy money. I can do this all day long. It's a lot of the waitresses I used to work with would get really, really pissed off with me because I would get more tips than they would because I had an English accent working in a small town in Wisconsin. So that was always quite interesting. But going to that position, I mean, you're freelancing, you're kind of figuring out a lot of these things. Did you then go and work full time for somebody? Like, how did you build this kind of expertise in brand strategy?
Great question. So I got tired of freelancing was the short answer. It wasn't, I felt like I wanted a change. I wanted the stability. So yes, I took a job actually working for a city, and I did basically business development and branding for a city. The official position is called economic development, but it's like functionally a branding and business development role. So I worked there for a few years, and I really, really enjoyed the work. It was like the perfect blend of strategy and business development. I got to talk with all sorts of B2B people by that point. Private equity funds that were going to invest $100 million in some biomanufacturing facility in town. Like, that's a whole different kind of conversation than some small business who wants, better drip sequences for the e-commerce store. So I learned a lot out of those years working for the city. But I reached a point where I didn't have anywhere to go. And the problem with that was it's both the nature of the industry, but I suspect that this is true for lots of marketing kinds of people in lots of different companies, which is I hit a ceiling. And basically the way I could progress was I could take a lateral move to another city or another company, or by some, grace of God, my boss would quit and I would get promoted to her position. And that was it. Like those were my options. So I could wait it out, and there was an unknown amount of time that I could wait it out. And I enjoyed the work, but I didn't enjoy it enough to wait around for however many years before that might happen. And as a result, I decided to make the leap. But I didn't wake up one morning, Chris, and say, oh God, I need to start working for myself. Like, I tried to be fairly intentional over about 3 to 6 months, like mapping out what I wanted to do next. And most of that was brand strategy work. So I had called up a friend of mine who was starting an agency. I said, hey, I do these things. Do you want me to come work with you for some stuff? And I got some work there and started to freelance again on the side. And then it all sort of culminated. And then I gave my 2 weeks notice and I peaced out. It was very fortuitous. It was very serendipitous in the sense of a lot of dominoes sort of just like fell into place. But had I not been out there asking people like, hey, is this something I could offer? I'm thinking about these things. I really want to, work in brand strategy because I love this work for the city. I think I can do it for companies. Let's, figure out something. Then none of those dominoes would have fallen into place in whether I wanted them or not.
It's funny that you say you were fortuitous with the way that it happened and you almost got lucky. But I find a lot of business owners get lucky when they start, and it's it's not the luck necessarily of, hey, I stopped one day and the next day I've got 10 clients, but you get lucky the more you try and the more opportunities you take, and really the more you put yourself out there, the higher likelihood of you becoming an overnight success, the higher likelihood of you getting that luck. So I think it's interesting that you say, hey, I got lucky with this, but you had to put yourself out there to be able to do that. And I'd imagine putting myself in your shoes, and for a lot of people listening, to the hundreds of thousands of listeners that we will have, once this podcast goes live, for those that are listening right now and kind of putting themselves in your shoes, that must have been quite scary to say, hey, I'm going to start freelancing. I don't know what this looks like, but I know that this isn't for me. Did you have any lack of identity as to what you wanted to go on to that? I know you said you had kind of a 3-month, process to go through that, but what were your feelings when you're like, hey, like, this isn't for me, but shit, what is for me? Like, what am I going to do next?
Yes. I had no clue what I was doing is the short answer, especially when I started. It was a lot of like throwing wet spaghetti noodles at the wall and seeing what sticks. It's like
Yeah.
one of those things. And even to your point, I think I definitely heard more no's than yeses during that like transition period. Like
From who?
It definitely was. From prospective clients, from
Yeah.
people out in the market, because I had freelanced before, so I kind of understood the motion. I had this sense of like, okay, I gotta go put myself out there. Let me work the networks that I already have. Who already is experiencing these challenges? Could I offer something like this? And there were a lot of no's during that period. And I think there were also, for me, the introspective side was like, what do I want to be doing? Because I used to build websites, and now it had been however many years later, and the industry had progressed so far, and I realized like I didn't want to build websites anymore. I could upskill, I could get better at what I used to do, but anymore I was more fascinated by the branding side. So a lot of it was trying to figure out, and through conversations with prospects, through conversations with friends and partners, like how can I position this branding wise that would make sense for these different kinds of for whatever company. Like I didn't know if I was going to have a niche or not. I didn't know if I wanted to work with startups or local businesses or I eventually basically ended up working with manufacturing and IT companies, and that was sort of my entry point into B2B. And that was because they had classic problems that I think tech sort of or that SaaS has mostly solved for in the last 5 years, and they're still playing catch up. And I could take that knowledge and visibility and translate it back to another industry. But a lot of that journey was figuring out like endless iterations. I think I could probably pull up some Google Doc I have that's probably 40 pages long, and it's got 30 different takes about what I wanted to sell and how I wanted to sell it. Like it was just one iteration after the other of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what people actually were paying attention to.
Did you find that the clients that you first attracted and the clients that you brought on the first couple of months of doing that, has that evolved now? Are you still working with those clients, or did you take any client you could to start? You just want to start making money with it. What was your thought process there?
Great question. The old principle I have is from, I think it's either Blair Enns or David C. Baker. It's one of them. They both talk a lot about expertise in the agency world. I think it's Blair who always talks about reinventing your firm one client at a time. So I was a guy who would take anything. I would take the work. And I feel in some ways like I learned a lot from those experiences. I learned what not to take. I learned what to say no to.
Yep.
Out of taking clients that I definitely did not work with again. The nice thing about brand strategy compared to maybe ongoing service agreements like marketing services is a lot of my work was packaged and had a start date and an end date.
Got ya.
And as we transitioned into Aligned, that's changed. Like our work at Aligned definitely has service agreements, and I think the work in the brand strategy world has informed a lot of the way we structure that and what clients we say yes and no to, because I don't think we have never entered in an engagement with a client at Aligned without doing some sort of upfront project for them. Like we have an audit, we have some strategy work.
Yeah.
We can do benchmarking of data. So we spend 30 to 60 days like kind of feeling it out.
Yep.
Saying, hey, is this client a good fit before we commit to something longer term? Because in my rule book, it's a lot easier to make peace with a short engagement than being 6 months into it and having to fire the client.
Oh,
So,
yeah, absolutely.
Like why hire the client if I'm eventually going to fire them anyways?
Exactly. Yeah, I think
yeah.
the audit process and the initial bite-sized engagement, it's not only does it get you to the position where obviously you're earning for your time, because a lot of people are, hey, we'll do an audit for free. Don't do that. It's the dumbest thing you can do, because you're going to give away a lot of your expertise, and you're just putting yourself in a position where you're commoditizing your service by saying that. And when you start to monetize those initial engagements that you have to do to be able to do a good job anyway. And from my standpoint with the marketing agency, we get in there, we do a full audit of the accounts, then we get into recommendations. For you, you're getting in there, you're looking at kind of the entire brand strategy, auditing that. You get to really showcase yourself as an expert then But like you said, it also gives you the ability to actually feel out them as a client, and you go, I don't know if I necessarily like working with this guy. I'm either going to triple my rate, or I'm going to not take them as a client, because we always we have the PIDA fee, which is the pain in the ass fee, and that's a fee that with some clients where it's like, hey, we're going to jack our rate and just see what happens here, because I know that working with this client, it's going to be a lot of work. They may be a really good client, but it's going to be really, really demanding, and the pain in the ass fee absolutely gets applied to this situation, because I know it's going to be a time sink compared to some of my other clients. So you have to, and you'll get a sense of that, obviously, the more you work with different clients. I'm curious, when you, just kind of sticking with the thought of the chronological order of, you start freelancing right now. If I can ask without being too personal, and please tell me, if you're not comfortable, what were you making full-time in that position? And then what were you starting to make as a freelancer to where you really felt comfortable making that transition?
Great question. I love being transparent about money, because it's just not something people talk a lot about. I think culturally there's a lot of like shame or something around it that just prevents people from talking about it. I mean, man, it's just money.
I adamantly disagree with the concept of not talking about money. I think it's the only way to educate, and that's for me. Like, especially, I mean, I came to this country at 18. Like, coming in here and like figuring out how the tax system works, like figuring out, I'm like, like this is legit. Like, there's so many opportunities now. Like, once you start to talk about money, you understand how to make more of it. And I think that's a big obstacle I see a lot of marketers face. Is I'm freelancing, I'm making a couple thousand on the month, but I'm making 80 grand a year. Like, how does that actually equate? Like, what's a freelancing equivalent salary, basically? Because, you got to figure out your taxes at the end of it. So I'm curious where you were at when you decided, what? And also, I'd love to know the age and the life situation you were at, what was the reasoning behind going, yes, I can make this jump, and I feel confident, or I feel like I've de-risked this enough where I'm not going to completely screw up my life by doing this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's see here. I was in my mid-20s, and at the economic development role, I think I was making like $70,000 a year. I think that was my salary. And of course, it's a city job. So if I had been private, it probably would have been a lot more. But it was, working for a municipal government. And I think my first 12 months in freelancing, I averaged something like 80 to 85, I think. I'd have to double check my net income. I feel lucky. I got a dinner table education growing up because my mom has a degree in finance and is a bookkeeper. And so I learned the sort of not just like what a profit and loss statement is or what a balance sheet is, but it's also the sort of thinking about cash flow management and understanding like run rates and runways about how much cash is in the bank and how to manage all of that. I really do think it's an important skill. The thing that helped me the most during those first 12 months, to be honest with you, was there was sort of a break-even number per month. So that was, rent. I think
Your
I had
expenses.
a credit card. Expenses. Yeah. So break even on expenses. So for me, it was like rent. I think I had a credit card I was paying off, and like some basic amounts of money for food and gas because I had to drive some places. But that was like it. So as long as I was making that much money per month, like my base expenses, I knew I was not going to get evicted. I wasn't going to live in my car. I didn't have to go through all the calls of like, hey, can I delay this payment sort of nonsense. And then anything above that, I could be more responsible with, or guilt-free spending, or save, invest, etc. So I had that number that first 12 months to try and break even on. And I think from a cash flow perspective, I didn't meet that exact number every month. What usually happens, and especially I think this is more true in freelance life than in like business building life, but in freelance life, there were some months where I was, 4x or 5 times the break-even amount because a contract got paid up front or something like that. Yeah. And then it was on me to sort of just responsibly manage how much money I was spending every month. And a lot of that for me personally was good to have like the business account, of course, for the LLC that I had, and then a personal account. And I'd only be moving money like once a month or twice a month to sort of quote unquote pay myself out of the business so that, spending didn't become reckless. And I used that cash infusion one month to help carry over through the others. I felt like that was a really important skill I'm still working on, but had during those first 12 months to keep me going. So, and since then, just to be transparent, I think it's waxed and waned. Some years have been, I think one year was a lot higher, and then the year after that, I think was a little bit lower, like probably closer to the salary again, 70. And then the year after that into this year is definitely on track to be once again much higher. So, it's the joys and tribulations of going out and doing your own thing.
What's the number per month that you had to hit to feel comfortable as a mid-20? Just for anyone that's listening that's mid-20s, they're in that situation, what was that number you were like, hey, like if I make this, life is it's not great, but it's good?
Oh, the number per month life was great, or life was good but not great, was like, I think it was like 2,200 a month. I think was what it was.
Yeah.
And man, if I was hitting 2,200 a month, it meant I could deal shop at the grocery store, but it wouldn't be like a big deal. Rent's covered. I've
steak
got
once a week.
Yeah, right. Add a little thing. Go get drinks with friends. That's not just some bottom shelf nonsense and all the rest of it. So yeah, it was about 2,200 a month. That life was good but not great, and then anything above that was just literal money. So
I remember when I first started Catalyst, it was 3,000 a month. I was like, if I can make 3,000 a month, I'm covered. And we had a client. We got a first client very, very quickly. So I was like, worst case scenario, if I can just keep this one client forever, I'm never going to go out of business. So I was like, right, that's a great kind of position to be in. And then our retainers, our minimum retainer used to be, when we first started, was 3,500 a month. So we got the first client at 3,500 a month, and then then we got a second one. I was like, oh shit, this is kind of fun. And then we got a third one, and I was like, oh, this is, it took us about 30 days to get our third client, and we were at that point now. I was like, right, we've got 3 clients. We were making 10 grand a month after 30 days. I was like, this is starting to become fun now. How do I be responsible? How do I figure out how to grow the business? And do I want to I remember having the conversation with my wife. I was like, hey, we could just stick at 3 clients forever. Like the naive of just like, oh, they'll stay with us forever. Like, why would we not just keep these 3 clients? But I knew at the end of the day, I knew if I could always have one client, everything was covered. We couldn't live an extravagant lifestyle. We couldn't, at the time we were renting, we hadn't bought a home. We were trying to buy a home at the time, which is why kind of starting at that time was the worst possible time I could have tried to start it. But we were at that position where I was like, right, if we can do this, we're always going to be covered. And that was a big, I think, confidence for me. But again, I was mid-20s, so there's a lot of people that are starting it who are, late 30s, early 40s, who have a wife, a husband, children, and the numbers are a little bit higher. And that's why the approach that I took of just going, hey, cold turkey, I'm leaving and I'm starting an agency and I'm going to go and find a client. I had the confidence and the expertise of knowing and the experience of knowing, hey, listen, I've just scaled a software development agency to multiple millions of dollars. I'm pretty confident in my ability to attract clients and sell, and my ability to deliver the products with the marketing. So I can go after this, and I have a relationship and a network where I had more confidence to go and do that. But if you're starting your approach of getting a couple of clients on the side, building it up, and my argument is get to the point where you match your expenses. And then you can start to have, and then maybe get one more, just to have a little bit of a buffer. Then if you want to leave, you can leave, or at that point you probably matched your income anyway, so you're just making double and you've given yourself a 100% raise. And I would love to see the face of anyone that goes and asks their boss for a 100% raise just to see what they would say. But this is the way to do that, is by learning to freelance on the side and then build out that expertise.
And I think a big misconception about this phase that I heard a lot during when I was figuring this out from others, kind of looking at what I was doing, was like, oh, you must be working so much, right? Because obviously you have a day job and then, you're freelancing on the side. And so you're sort of, you're working in the evenings or in the mornings or whatever. And for me, a lot of it kind of came back to, I'm not really interested in, let's call it quote unquote, making this sacrifice for 3 years. I'm not going to get stuck in gear working a full-time job and freelancing on the side for 3 years. This is an exit plan. And if this exit plan works out, then it's only going to be 90 days. So I think it's important for anybody listening, and this is learned wisdom from my experience, was it's okay to shift gears. Like, you can shift into second and you can work 12, 16-hour days or whatever works for you. And then after 90 days, maybe it's not working for you. Maybe it is working for you. And you can change gears. You can change your mind. You can say either maybe right now is not the right time, or holy shit, in my experience, this is really taken off. I need to quit my job. Now let's do this full time, because not only have I hit, the financial basics, but I really like what I'm doing. I feel like there's momentum here. And now that allows that, schedule to shift back. And of course, it's harder if there's kids around, or if that burden feels higher financially. Mm-hmm. And maybe it does take longer. Maybe it's a 6-month commitment to get to that point. But it's just, for me, it was being honest with myself about, like, this is not a permanent situation. This is a short-term experiment to see how far I can take this and how quickly I can make it happen.
Yeah, it's an exit strategy. It's a launch plan. I vision the rocket with the astronaut counting down.
Yeah.
Like, that's exactly what it is. It's how long do you need to give yourself to figure out whether this is going to work? And if you can get to the point in 3 months where you are covering your expenses, the argument that I make at that point is, imagine what you can do in 12 months. And that's to me, you'll figure out what your average client retention is going to be. Not every client is going to stay with you forever. I was very naive at the beginning. I'm like, hey, every client's always going to work with us. We have lost clients. Like, it sucked at the time, and it's like, all right, like, it makes sense. Like, they went with in-house talent instead, whatever. You get to that point where you are going to have some churn with all of your clients, and some clients go out of business, especially if you're going to work with startups. Like, it's just name and game of the kind of being in that industry. But if you bring on, let's say it's 2 clients you need to match your income. If you brought on 2 clients every 3 months, but the average retention was 6 to 9 months, you have a little bit of a compounding effect, and suddenly after 12 months you've got, and I can't do the math that quick in my head, but let's say it's 6 clients that you've got after 12 months. At that point you are triple your income right now with most likely a pretty built-up pipeline. And what I found, I'm just crossing that 18-month mark now of starting Catalyst.
Yeah.
We don't have to sell anymore. That's the
Right.
difference. It took us about 13, 14 months. That was what I found, is that after 12 months, we could shift gears, and suddenly everything was a referral and everything was inbound. And we'd still do some prospecting, and we still have a little bit of those automations set up, to try and reach out to people. We've started launching a lot of automations right now based around people that are hiring for specific job titles, because why would you hire a $200,000 director of demand right now when you can work with us for a third of the cost and have everything you need to be able to do that? And that's literally the conversation we're having, and it's going down very, very well with VPs of marketing right now. It's honestly, it's kind of crazy. Like, the messages we're sending, the response, I'm like, oh, this is a really good time to be doing this.
It's great targeting. Yeah.
Once you hit that 12, 14, 18-month period, you've been in business long enough where you've built up a reputation, at least in the kind of the networks that you want to be in. And if you've been very vocal in building a personal brand over that time period, we don't have a sales team for that reason. Everybody just comes to me and they want to work with us, and we get on a call and they're like, hey, I just feel like I know you. Great. Absolutely. Let's talk about how we can help you then. But that first 12 months, I think, is the hardest part to get through. And I think once you've justified to yourself that you can go outbound sales and find clients, once you've learned how to do that 3-4 times, there's something changes. So something changes in your brain. Something changes with the way that you view. For me, you just view society and like getting a job in general. I'm like, hey, I never need to go and get a job, because I can always sell somebody to hire me to do something marketing related. Always.
Yes.
At any point. Again, all clients could find me tomorrow. By the end of the month, I'll have 4 or 5 clients back. That's kind of you learn how to do that. I'm just curious to kind of hear your take. Obviously, I haven't gone through that.
Yeah, for sure. The strategic coach, I think, calls that like the moment of confidence when you secure your first client. Because basically, until that point that you actually get the check in the mail, or, anymore, sorry, I'm old school, clearly, but, the Stripe invoice is paid, or however you're processing payments. Like,
the crypto's gone through.
Up. Right, yeah. It's all made up, right? It's all in your head. And then suddenly that money hits your account and you're like, oh, it's real. This is happening. And it's such a boost of confidence. I can't agree more. We're still in our, for Aligned, Aligned sort of started as a collaboration, really. Nick and I host a live show, which you had mentioned, B2B Power Hour, and it's a podcast as well. And this is just a fun side project for both of us. He has an enterprise sales background, and we were talking mostly about sales and marketing alignment and why it's such a mess in B2B. And over time, more companies sort of came to us and said, hey, could you help us with XYZ? Sometimes it was social selling focus, which is definitely something we're really focused on. Other times it was, hey, can we get your eyeballs on this like messaging plan and how we're kind of going to market and using our sales team to get after these clients. And that sort of gradually built up enough where we sort of, quote unquote, launched it. But we said it was sort of stealth mode because it was just a limited client set. I was still working on my other freelance clients. Nick actually had a job. So we were sort of just figuring out how to make it work. And then Nick had left his job sometime this past year. And then in September, we had sort of made Aligned a thing. So we're still sort of in our outbound phase. We've had some good inbound plus outbound. But I do think it is the mistake that I see a lot of people make when they first jump out into the freelancing world or working for themselves or building their own company, building their own agency, is that they forget to test the waters first. Like we tested the waters a lot. Like we made sure the water was warm before we jumped in the pool. Like we didn't want to go cold turkey on a previous job and then say, well, I thought my network had these opportunities. Well, I thought these companies would buy from me. A lot of it for us was, let's just test this out first. Let's like see, are people even interested? Can I get somebody on the phone? Does the conversation go really well? Would they be interested in the services? If I pass them along pricing or we have a conversation about what that might mean for their company, would they be willing to buy today or within the next week? If those things aren't lining up, like take some time and figure out, we did, how to make that work for the market. Because I've had friends leave their jobs and then they go through the testing process. And now suddenly, because that takes 30 days-ish to sort of figure out whether or not there's momentum here, suddenly you're losing time, right? Then there's the financial stress that might set in. And then there's all the other obligations, right? That we forget. We have a network, whether or not we're working at a full-time job or we're by ourselves. We can call people up and say, hey, would you be interested if I offered this to you? Or like, you probably are experiencing this problem. Yeah,
that's the biggest point I've tried to make to marketers is like in your network right now, there's $10,000 a month in retaining clients. Doesn't matter what industry you're in. I guarantee there's $10,000 a month in retaining clients right now in every single marketer's network. It could be guys from college, it could be on LinkedIn, it could be in communities, guys that you work with. It doesn't matter. There is $10,000 a month in retaining work for you right now. So if you're making 50, 60 grand a year as a marketer, you're actually making less than you would if you started freelancing, and I'm pretty confident on that. I found that when I jumped out, I was making six figures as a chief revenue officer, and I made multiple six figures as a marketing agency owner. Like, it really, you can start to kind of unlock and figure out a lot of that. For me, the point that you talk about there when you're saying if you jump cold turkey into it, the hardest thing to replace is that cost of expenses, because that's the stress factor right there. So if your expenses are $2,500, $3,000, maybe it's $4,000 or $5,000 a month. If you have that much of expenses a month, every month you don't make anything because you're testing, you're losing $5,000 a month, and that really, really stinks, and it's really hard to justify. And it takes an emotional toll on you, and I think it eats away at your confidence. So instead of doing that, if you say, right, even if you got to the point where you said, right, I get to, let's say you had 20 grand saved up and you're like, hey, I want to start an agency. If you got to the point where you said, right, we've got this much savings, we think we have this much runway with that, instead of going, right, 4 months at $5,000 a month of expenses, why not get to the point where you're making $3,000 a month? Now you've got 10 months runway, assuming you suck at sales and can't bring on anybody else. And you're never going to last 10 months, because if you lose money for 10 months, you're going to, your wife or your husband's not going to let you get past 3-4 months at that rate anyway. So
definitely not. No.
You're never going to actually get to that point. But to me, that's where building it up on the side, as a marketer that wants to start their own agency, that wants to start freelancing, the biggest thing you're going to do is just pick up the phone and call people. Because I made that mistake early on of assuming, I announced, I've got an agency. Anyone that wants to come work with me, like, they're going to reach out to me. And then we got a couple of clients, but I called them and they're like, oh, I didn't even realize you did that. I was like, oh, I posted on LinkedIn about it. What are you talking about? Like, I changed my job status. Like, what do you mean you didn't know about it? And it's like, that's not a good enough way to announce that you have it. The best way to announce you have an agency is to call anyone that's in your network and say, hey, I'm just calling you just to let you know I'm starting my own company. I'm doing this, this, and this. Is this something you'd be interested in? If it's not, do you know anybody that would be a good fit for this service? And would you mind either making the introduction, or is that someone that I already have in my network? You do that for 7 days straight, for 100 phone calls a day, you'll have 3 clients at the end of the 7 days. I guarantee it. You'll at least have the prospecting meetings. You will get 3 clients out of that. It's not a difficult thing to do. It's the awareness and the education of this is what it takes to get started. Because if you've never had to do it before, and you've sat behind a desk being a digital marketer, and you don't really know how to do a lot of this, and that to me is where that's the biggest downfall that marketers make when they first start.
Well, and isn't that ironic in some way that marketers forget to market themselves when they go work for themselves? I always find that deeply ironic, which is like, I'm going to, when I work for a company, I'm going to do this. And sure, budget's a part of it. But it's like, I have this big creative strategy, and we're going to do ads here, and we're going to do creative assets here, and we're going to do organic here. And when I start my own company, I'm going to announce it as my new job.
Yeah, I'm going to post on LinkedIn.
Is that how you would handle any other company? No. So why are you handling it like that? And to your point, I think I struggled early on the most with that outbound sales motion. Like, that was a big learning curve for me. Mm-hmm. And I believe it's a very hard-won experience to go through that, because it's not something that, as marketers, you usually have to go through. You call up a seller, they go through this every day. Like, call your favorite business development representative at any startup, at any tech company in the industry. This is their MO. Like, this is what they go through every single day of every single week. They're used to it. So if that's the learning curve to, like, start your own thing, it is so worth it. And you just get used to hearing no. That question, though, who do you know that could benefit from this, is such a powerful one. I think I've personally won probably 4 to 6 clients just through that question alone.
Yeah. Is there anybody else in your network? Anyone else in your network that you'd recommend? And if there's not now, just please bear us in mind for the future. And then next thing you know, you get an email. Hey, this person just mentioned you. Great, let's have a conversation. I always say I think the secret to the success we've had with Catalyst and why, because a lot of people look at it with Catalyst and go, listen, 18 months ago, we had no idea who you were. Like, literally nobody had heard of me in like the B2B tech space. Like, nobody had heard of me. And they go, how did you manage to get to kind of where you're at right now? Like, what's the kind of secret sauce? And yes, the personal branding has been a huge element of being able to have my face be on everyone's LinkedIn profile literally every day. Like, it's a huge element of it. However, I was in sales for 5 years before I started a marketing agency. I've trained sales teams. I've been a chief revenue officer. I've closed millions of dollars worth of contracts. So when I suddenly started and I was like, I'm just going to pick up the phone and call some people. When I launched my first SaaS company, I ran a sales team there. We had to make 100 phone calls a day or you didn't go home. Like, that was literally the extent of what we were doing. We had 6 of us that were doing that. We had this sales outbound motion, and I saw the success that you could have with that. And the reason that I transitioned from sales to marketing is that I figured out I can call 100 people a day and I can speak to maybe 10 of them. But with marketing, I can reach 100,000 people a day. And that was where that's for me, the light bulbs went off, and I was like, oh, this is way easier than sales. Like, this is
so much.
But you got to put money behind it. And that's where a lot of paid ad specialists specifically, they go, hey, I want to start an agency. That's great, but you don't have a 10 grand a month marketing budget. So what are you going to do? And it's like, oh shit, yeah. Like, what am I going to do? You can see kind of like the suddenly it's like, oh shit, like I don't know what to do. Like, I can't run Google ads because I'm not going to spend 10 grand a month, especially if you've just left and you're already losing 5 grand a month. Like, this is where it gets interesting. This is where, again, building up, testing, figuring it out. These are the steps that people don't take, and where it absolutely increases your chance of success and de-risks this as an opportunity for you to build a kind of a new life out of this.
100%. That's Nick and I are living and breathing results of experiments. I mean, let's see here. It would have been more than a year and a half ago now. We just started to experiment on LinkedIn. And a lot of it for us was not really about content, right? A lot of it for us was, how do we, instead of calling somebody, how could we use DMs, connection requests, comments, other direct forms of engagement to like get in front of somebody, warm them up, get them on a phone call. And like we knew we had something when Nick, in one day, not for us, but for his company, used what we were experimenting with, I think to create $800,000 worth of pipeline in one day.
Wow.
And he called me at the end of the day and he said, I think we have something here. And I said, I sure as hell hope so. If we don't have something, then we're screwed. That's incredible. So staying true to those experiments has been the one of the most important habits for us. Like, even though now we're further along, right? We have clients on retainer, big retainers. We have strategy clients coming inbound, or we're prospecting them outbound. Like, even though we have all of that set up, we're still experimenting. The world changes. The way messaging has to happen changes. The kinds of conversations that people have change. A year ago it was, how do I get my employee advocacy? How do I get my employees to use LinkedIn to promote our company? Now the conversation is, well, we don't have budget for that, so how do we get our sellers to use LinkedIn to get deals closed? It's like, well, that's a different conversation, and we can help with that. But it's always staying in tune with the market. Yeah.
So feel free to say we would have to hire you to answer this question. But when you say Nick got $800,000 of pipeline from this one strategy, what was it?
Sure. So I can provide at least a high level. The details are, the devil's in the details sometimes. But basically it's, you construct a really narrow list of a targeted ICP, preferably shared job titles, if that works in the industry. But most importantly, it's shared functions. So at some companies, directors of finance do the same things as CFOs at other companies. So what is important is to figure out what's the shared function across multiple companies, right? Do all of the directors of paid ads management do the same thing, right? That's a good question. Then it's, let's score. Who's active, who's not active? So is somebody posting content? Is somebody commenting, liking, resharing stuff? Is somebody just have a LinkedIn profile that's like a job resume and that's it? They're not really active on the platform. Then it's, okay, let's go engage. So instead of starting with a connection request or an email or something like that, what we would always do is, for those who are actively posting, we'd hop in their comments. We would comment on every single post. Within 2 weeks, they know who you are. If you send them a DM, they're going to be like, oh yeah, hey, nice to see you, whatever, right? And then those who are actively liking, commenting, etc., is kickstarting a conversation based on shared interests. We call it the race to commonality. What's something that you share in common? Did you both like the same resource? Do you both follow the same influencer? Do you both go to the same college and they're liking all their alma mater stuff? Go down the list. Start a conversation on that. Send them a DM. And then obey, this is the last and this is the most crucial thing, obey the vampire sales rule. So vampires in folklore were not allowed into your home unless if you were invited in, right? So in sales, in vampire sales, you're not allowed to pitch until they invite you to. So the goal of that conversation is to get to know them, to keep on asking questions, to drop valuable insights. Oh, I didn't think about this. Oh, did you see this person's thing? Oh yeah, I just read this Medium post the other week that was talking about this. You should check it out. Or like, have you thought about this yet? On and on and on and on until the magic words. So Chris, tell me, what do you do? And then that's vampire sales. The speed to close on all of those motions is absolutely insane, right? Because suddenly there's a lot of credibility, there's a lot of trust. They know who you are. You've shown an interest in them beyond just, I want to sell you something. And we've seen this not just for sellers, SDR teams, BDR teams at large companies, but for individuals who are prospecting and building their own company. Works really well, especially on social, because nobody wants to be pitched. So you might as well wait until they ask you to deliver that. That's the essential high-level strategy.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's. I like the vampire analogy. Yeah, that's very interesting. We actually not to go too far down a tangent, but we have a similar approach that we take with our clients when we do podcasting. And we call it. I don't know if I talked to you about this before, but we do what's called a Trojan horse approach with podcasting. So you go and set up a podcast as a CEO, and you find again your target list of, let's say, 100 companies and CEOs of those companies, high-level executives. And you say, hey, I'd love to have you on my podcast. And then they come onto the podcast and you have a great conversation with them. And at the end of it, you're shooting the shit, you're going back and forth, and you just try and get a little bit of a sales pitch. And you say, hey, I don't know if you'd be interested in learning more, but we could absolutely arrange a call to go in there. Next thing you know, the conversion rate from that podcast to getting a sales meeting, phenomenally high. But also the conversion rate of asking somebody to come on a podcast is way, way higher than saying, hey, do you want to come and get pitched on why my service would be able to help you? Because on the podcast, you can actually gear it around. And I promise I'm not doing it on this podcast, but you can this isn't a Trojan horse right now. But you can gear it around basically saying, uncovering what your solutions may be able to offer to them and kind of uncover what that problem is on a podcast, and then you're able to actually go ahead and try and get a pitch off at the end. And I've had that with a lot of our clients, CEOs do that, and the conversion, especially like Series A, like smaller companies when they're trying to get into bigger accounts, the conversion rate is crazy of getting them on there. And it puts it on a public format, and everybody wants to feel heard, so everybody wants to go on a podcast.
Exactly, and that's why I've always found podcast conversations, inviting somebody to, like, we're doing a round table on the B2B Power Hour in a few weeks, and it's not just, it's high-level folks with, 40,000 plus followers, etc. If you just sent them a DM and said, hey, can I grab coffee with you? They're not going to say yes, because they don't have the time, they think it's low value, etc. You say, hey, we're hosting this show, would you like to come participate? We want to feature your voice. Oh, the tables, they turn.
Oh, absolutely,
for sure. Yeah.
It's an ego thing, 100%.
Oh yeah.
Everybody wants to feel heard, and in the economy right now of or the time we're in with LinkedIn and personal branding and social selling and building this persona, any way you can feed into that is absolutely that's if you're looking at trying to get people like that, podcasting is the best way to do that. It's just the only downside that I find with podcasting, and why I never started a podcast with Catalyst, is I always want to be in the position of being the expert. So if I'm interviewing somebody on marketing specifically, I'm putting them in a position of expertise, which then it's not going to attract clients to me, it's going to attract clients to them. And that's why a lot of marketing agency owners won't have me on their podcast for that reason, is that they don't want to interview another marketing expert. With this is more of a passion project than anything. This is a way to hopefully inspire marketers. And obviously it ties, very much in with the community and course that I'm building. That's a big goal, is to try and, kind of raise awareness through that. But I'm not trying to sell through this, and it's interesting the ways that you can kind of find podcasts to be very, very successful in what you're trying to accomplish, but you always have to try and have that unique spin, because there's so many podcasts out there, and everybody I just nearly called this not another B2B podcast, just to see, like, because there's so many B2B podcasts right now, so you have to obviously try and find a unique angle as well.
Yes, 100%. Can't agree more.
So let's kind of jump back on track, because I know we've gone off on a tangent there, but let's jump back onto track with, when you transition to being self-employed. You've started this off at the first, have you crossed the 1 year mark right now?
As self-employed, for sure, yeah. But for Aligned, no, not technically.
Okay, so you're approaching kind of that 1 year mark with Aligned. What are some of the biggest hurdles that you faced over the 12 months? And has there ever been the moment where you sat there and you're thinking, shit, this would be a lot easier if I just had a job when I was making $100,000 a year working privately for some company doing the exact same thing?
That thought has definitely surfaced multiple times over the months. I think it's very natural, I think it's a supernatural thing to say, is the grass greener on the other side, And I think it was always Mark Manson who talked about the shit sandwich. He was the guy who wrote How to Not Give a Fuck About Anything.
I'm literally reading his book right now.
Yeah. So he talks about the shit sandwich, and I always liked this, because it was like every job you work, whether you work for yourself, whether you work for somebody else, there's a shit sandwich. Okay. Yeah. There's something that you're going to have to do that you don't like to do. In one of my jobs, it was that I had a 35-minute commute each way, mostly in distance, because I live in Colorado. It wasn't in traffic, It was like solid distance, time in the car, back and forth every day, and I hated it. I'm not a huge fan of that. In freelance life, of course, part of the shit sandwich is figuring out cash flow, financial management, some of the stresses of meeting your expenses. I think the biggest hurdle for us at Aligned was we were trying to figure out what we wanted to be when we grew up. We wanted to figure out, what is the actual problem that we want to solve in the market? Because we could do a lot, right? I've got an enterprise seller as a partner. He's done big mergers and acquisitions. Like, he sold businesses to other businesses for hundreds of millions of dollars. He's done complex deals. I've got a brand strategy background. I've done the detailed marketing once upon a time. Like, we could do a lot together. So it was figuring out not just what do we want to do, because that's one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is what do our customers need? What are the problems that they're experiencing? And we began reinventing the firm one client at a time, right? So once we had a general direction, we started testing. And I think the general direction that we've taken is much more go-to-market focused about audits and strategies and implementation partners, whether that's sales training, helping sellers figure out like the best ways to use social or the best ways to develop targeted account lists, or some sort of like marketing and sales alignment work for a company. Whereas we spent, 3 to 4 months trying to just testing, right? And we had a couple clients, and then one client would leave and we'd replace it with another one and do a different sort of project. And so there was a lot of, I would call it more internal stress than external stress. And what I mean by that is like, is this actually what I want to be doing sort of question, right? Is this the kind of work that I really want to build a business around versus, oh my God, I can't pay my bills, external stress. So I felt like the biggest hurdle for me was, okay, I know I can do a lot of things. What specifically do I want to do?
Yeah.
And I think we finally found some clarity around that, which is good, and continuing to enhance that into this new year.
How focused has the monetary compensation been around what you want to do? Is this where you look to, how much has it evolved into, this is what we can make the most money doing, the two of us, so we're going to do this, compared to, this is what I love doing, this is what I want to do? How has that kind of played into this as you've grown?
I think it's a fair balance between the two. David C. Baker wrote this excellent book called The Business of Expertise, and in it he calls being passionate about your work the deepest privilege anybody can have. Because there's 7 billion people in the world who probably aren't passionate about what they do for work, right? The rice farmers probably aren't waking up going, hell yeah, I get to rice farm today, right? It's just work.
Yeah.
It's just a job to do. It's just money to make, a living to create. So it is a deep privilege, I think, to be really passionate about what you actually wake up and do every day. And for us, I think there's always going to be some work we're doing that we're kind of meh about. But that's fine. It's work. It's living. And so for us, what we were trying to triangulate was, instead of how much, what's the most amount of money we can make versus what's the passion that we have, it's what can the market sustain, and what can we feel, us personally building a company, feel like we can sustain a business around.
Yeah.
And for us, that sort of came back to like, all right, well, every client is going to go through some sort of initial engagement phase, because we don't want to do these implementation projects without some version of screening, and they're going to pay us for our expertise during that time. That was a big learning lesson for us. And on top of that, it was, okay, what will make that worthwhile? And it's definitely some of the like hourly calculations back of like, okay, how much time would this sort of audit take? And at an hourly rate, what does that translate back to for the company? And is that worth our while? We definitely had some discussions about doing the numbers of, okay, well, if we were just freelance, let's say it was $250 an hour, and this is what we would charge to do this. And we translate that up and go, oh, wow, we're charging a lot less than what that is, but does that make sense? And all, kind of thinking about the scales there. So I would say we have not optimized for the amount of money that we're making, but we also haven't optimized for the amount of passion we have for our work. I would say we have really optimized for building a sustainable bootstrapped company. And for us, that's, can we continue to recruit and retain clients that need our services in these specific areas and feel like over the next 24 months, we're not going to go anywhere? And I can say with 100% certainty today, yes, that is for sure where we're at.
Awesome. We're going to take a quick moment to pause this episode and thank our sponsors. First, we've got the first sponsor, which is True Classic, the clothing company. As you all know from all of my content, I've been wearing True Classic for the last 18 months, and it truly is the staple of my wardrobe. What I find is that a lot of the clothes that I buy previously were all too baggy, they didn't fit right. The best part about True Classic, not only is it incredibly soft, but for those of you that have broader shoulders, that have larger arms, who just tend to be a little bit more athletic, the fit is absolutely amazing. It makes you look great, and a lot of people call these really the push-up bras for guys. I can tell you, when you wear these t-shirts, you look good. If you're interested in trying True Classic, there's going to be a link in the description of this episode. There's going to be my personal link. Go ahead, check out the store. I guarantee you, you will not be sorry if you start wearing True Classics. If you do end up purchasing them, please let me know what you purchased. I'm curious to hear feedback. Moving on to our second sponsor, which is the Independent Marketer, which is an online course and community that I've created to be able to teach digital marketers how to go out and break out of the golden handcuffs and ultimately launch either their own freelancing career or build it into their own digital marketing agency. In the description is going to be a link to that course. And as a thank you for listening to this podcast, there's going to be a special $100 discount on that course as well. If you do have any questions on that, please feel free to reach out to me directly or shoot me a message on LinkedIn. Back to the episode. So knowing that you've been running the business for the last year, obviously you've had some times that haven't been the best. Like we say, it's not all kind of sunshine and rainbows. You've had moments where you've maybe questioned, is this for me? Is this what I want to do long term? I personally have had questions of, is this going to fulfill me the most compared to other things? Like, is running a marketing agency, is it really fulfilling personally for me? Like, would I rather go and be a high school soccer coach? Like, I love soccer. Like, would that be more fulfilling for me? I actually turned down an executive director position at a local soccer club about 18 months ago, right when I was starting Catalyst, because I just got out of running an agency, and I was like, damn, that would be awesome. But I was like, you know what? For me, it wasn't necessarily the greatest fit, and I knew with getting kind of starting with freelancing, let's just see where this goes, and obviously it's blossomed now into a really thriving company. How do you stay motivated? And what would your advice for others to stay motivated over that, first 12 months? Because there are going to be those lows, there are those difficult times, there are those moments where your first client leaves you, and even if you say, hey, you didn't do a great job on this, or this isn't really what we thought we were going to get, what's your advice for people that are overcoming those kind of situations?
Ooh, that's a good, deep question. I am a people pleaser at heart, so those are always the toughest situations to be in, when clients are like, hey, we didn't really basically like what you did. And it's like, shit. Well, that sucks. The advice that continues to return to me was from a mentor of mine, and he always said, ride the wave.
Yeah.
It's a wave. And the best thing about waves is they always crash into the shore and then they recede. They always disappear. And that goes for good things and bad things, right? Good things are also waves. Right? Sometimes there's just more good waves than there are bad waves.
Yeah.
And I have definitely been in really shitty situations, having worked for myself, where it was just one bad wave after the other. And I remember thinking to myself one day, I was like, is this ever going to end? I think like a client was pissed at the same time a prospect said no, at the same time a client left, at the same time I was like stressed out of my mind because like money was all over the place. I was like, is this wave ever going to end? And then I realized, oh yeah, well, by nature, yes, of course it will. And it's not to be super zen or stoic about it. I think it's helpful to be, but for me, it was always being honest with myself, which was like, I feel stressed today. Just even saying that to myself was a huge relief, because then it was like, I've named it. Okay, I'm present to it. I'm aware that I'm stressed today. And that might inform the way that I talk to people or the way that I approach conversations, or like I'm feeling really anxious today, or I feel really depressed today, or whatever those emotions that come out. Like, being honest to myself was always the most important part of that journey, because then I could say, okay, well, maybe I'll be depressed today, or maybe I'll be stressed today. Let's ride this wave. And then the wave would last however, and magically, for me, usually it was 2 to 3 days was the longest that wave would ever last. And then got another chance to keep on going. It's just, for me, it was a lot of emotional honesty or radical candor with myself, honestly, that kept me going.
Yeah, I know. I think that's really great advice for anyone, because I think there is this misconception of it's always going to be good waves, and to kind of piggyback off that, I think it's important to note that you are on a bad wave, and it's, shit's hitting the fan. You lost a client. Someone you thought was going to close. Then we had people that we thought were going to close who just ghost. It's like, what the fuck have you gone? Like, you literally, you went to start next week, and like now you're going to ghost. Like, it's that happens when you run your own business. And yes, you can sit there and beat yourself up about it, or you can say, listen, this is a shit week, this is a shit day. That is what it is. But at the same time, when things are going good, and for us, when we closed 30 grand a month in a week of retaining clients, and I was like, I got to sit back and go, holy shit, like, this is unbelievable. Like, and you have to kind of sit back and go, this is the highs. We've been through the lows, these are the highs, and it does come. It's very cyclical. It's peaks and valleys, and you have to kind of take that moment where you say, all right, this is a really good moment. I'm gonna smoke a cigar, I'm gonna have a beer, I'm gonna take this all in, because this is a moment that when I'm in the down and the negatives, I want to be able to reflect back on and say, yeah, but it was worth it then, and that was a month ago, and it's not that far away from happening again. And that, to me, has been a really important part of it. And one of the advantages that I think you have in this situation is you have a co-founder. So you have somebody that you can ride the waves with. I don't. I'm, solo entrepreneur. In my previous company, I had 5 other partners, so we could ride the waves together. But ultimately, it was having 5 partners which led me to leaving and starting my own thing, because I wanted full control. I realized that I could grow companies faster if it was me that was directing it, rather than always having to kind of discuss everything. And, too many cooks in the kitchen, basically, is what it came down to. So from your perspective, how important is having Nick as a co-founder? And then what other communities have you found that you've been able to rely on as an entrepreneur?
I think having a partner, and you even hinted at this, is not a good or a bad thing. It can be both. And in the bridge of leaving my job, I had contracted for this agency, and there was this conversation about maybe me coming on as a partner, or something in that conversation. And there were 2 other founders there. And after a few months, it became really clear, like, I was not a good fit. Like, we did things differently. We were on different pages. And I didn't really learn until working with Nick what was actually going on. And what was actually going on was it was a low-trust environment. And I think the primary criteria of a really good partner is a high-trust environment, that there's a lot of trust. And trust is boundary setting, of course, like, no, I'm not available right now. Yes, I am available right now. Or, no, that's not okay to say in my company, or whatever else sort of boundaries need to be set. Obviously, reliability and accountability. Do they follow through? And when they don't, do they take ownership of it? Right? If you are sharing secrets, are they going around and telling everybody? Or are they keeping it confidential? Right? Are they generous in their time or in their perspective? Are they non-judgmental about the hard stuff? Do they create space for the important sorts of conversations? Like, all of these elements are so crucial to make a partnership work. And I feel very lucky that Nick and I definitely have a high trust relationship that we've built through a lot of relentless work together, starting with a live show, and then starting just meeting weekly, and then a live show, and then the podcast that came out of that, and then consulting that came out of that. That was like 1 client at a time, then 2 clients at a time, and gradually built up where I felt, wow, not only is this person really smart and intelligent and capable and has all the skills that I really am seeking for in a partner and complements my skill set nicely. I think that's where a lot of people end. I was also looking like, hey, do I trust him?
Yeah.
Do I actually think, like, if something went really wrong, is he going to take ownership for the pieces of the puzzle that maybe kind of were his, maybe weren't, maybe it was fuzzy, but he's going to own it? He's going to say, look, I screwed up in this ways. I'm sorry. Let's try our best to not do it again. And of course the answer is yes, right? And I think having a partner is really valuable. On the flip side, it can also be really messy if those pieces aren't in place. And I think that's to your point about the communities. Like, there's so many other ways to find sustainable, trusting relationships, either online or in your city, with people who maybe are in the same industry, maybe not. I remember early on in my freelance journey, there was like 5 or 6 of us who I had met through various friends who were all freelancing. And so we got together a number of times over beers, I think, and just had good conversations. And the best part is sometimes it was about work. Sometimes it was not at all about work, right?
Yeah.
A lot of it is like, hey, can I just talk to you about what's going on? Or like, did you see this? And you just bonding and creating those relationships. Like those, to me at least, have always been super important in this journey because it can be lonely. And there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. And it's really powerful to have friends and colleagues who you feel like you can go see once a month or once a quarter or however often and have a really, I always like this phrase, life-giving conversation. Like you feel energized at the end of it. And you say, that was so good to see you. I loved, hanging out with you. That was such a good conversation. Like those are so important. So I've always had that in person here in Denver. I'm from the state, so I have a lot of local networks here. And then online as well. Like LinkedIn's been a big boon for meeting new people and having great friendships and relationships. And some Slack communities here or there, but I haven't found as much personally out of those.
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn for me has been the biggest driver of community. I'm in Rev Genius and Pavilion and Exit 5. I found a lot of clients out of those. It's been great for that. I've not really built any true relationships out of those. It has all been from LinkedIn. And a lot of them, honestly, have been from going on a podcast with somebody, chatting with somebody, saying, hey, do you want to get a coffee and just like chat about things? And I've asked people to get a coffee, and some of them go, no. I asked, recently asked someone, and they were like, I'm not really interested. All right, fuck you then. Like, no problem. Like, that's fine. Like, whatever. Like, what I mean? Like, you can definitely be more proactive with that. For me, what I struggled with, being, living in between, Milwaukee and Chicago, kind of South Milwaukee area. Chicago was too far to really go to a lot of the events, and Milwaukee really lacked a lot of the startup lifestyle. It talks about how it has it all, and it's this, this next Silicon Valley. It's all bullshit. Like it's not. Like they really lack a lot of that entrepreneurial side of it. So I could never find the in-person events to be able to do that. So I started looking more online, and then I found I was having much better conversations, much better relationships, and I built then a really strong network of peers that I could basically bounce ideas off. And guys like yourself, you'd have a question, we shoot messages on the LinkedIn, jump on each other's podcasts. Like you have more of that relationship to be able to do that, and that's something that I think is missing, specifically if you're a freelancer right now. And that's why when I was building my course and I wanted to have this educational component, so I'm going to teach you how to go from digital marketer to agency owner. That to me that was an easier element of that. The platform that I chose is called Heartbeat, which is a community management platform that hosts courses on there because of the fact that I had this community aspect to it as well. So we have like the Slack channels, you have the events in there, we have the ability for people to connect with each other, and it is a true community around becoming a agency owner and becoming a digital marketing freelancer. Because that's, for me, that was what I missed when I was first starting off. I reached out to probably 10 agency owners, honestly, trying to get, say, hey, like, can I buy you a coffee? Can I buy you a beer? Can I take you out for lunch? Like, and this was all pretty much in the local area. I had some that were more Zoom calls. Nobody responded but one guy in Milwaukee who I actually went to college with, and he was like, let's get a coffee. We met up, and it was a great conversation. I remember thinking afterwards, I was like, one guy had the decency to respond to that, and I was like, it really kind of pissed me off, and I already have quite a large chip on my shoulder, but I was like, that really just like added to the, I was like, I'm coming for you guys with your agencies, I'm going to grow bigger than you guys now. So that was kind of one of them where I was like, all right, like, this is war. So for me, that allowed me to kind of decide, right, I'm gonna really go at this aggressive now, and I'm gonna build my own community, and basically screw you if you don't want to have a coffee. Like that's fine, and that I think has to be the mentality. It's nothing personally against them. I just, if you don't have the time, like that's fine. Like that's not really kind of any skin off my nose with that. But when building the course, I wanted to have that community component because it's so important, I think, to the longevity of launching a career like this. You can start and you can do very, very well, but even after 6 months, I remember I got a job offer that was between 150 and 200,000 a year, and at the time, 6 months into Catalyst, and I was thinking, shit, this would be nice. And it was more, at the time, it was more than the agency was making. I was like, and I was like, oh, could I do it? And could I keep the clients? Like, what could I do? And, I have a very good sounding board in my wife. She's always been kind of the voice of reason with me, and she very quickly reminded me just how terrible of an employee I would be. So I was like, all right, actually, that's a good point. I'd probably been fired pretty soon after. But now you see all the layoffs that are going on, and you sit there and you think, maybe it wasn't the best opportunity to take. Maybe there's a reason that I didn't do that. And that actually brings me on to the next point, is that as somebody that's self-employed, somebody that's a freelancer, a business owner, you're hitting the inflection point right now. I think of that confidence point of where you're not going to have to be selling much longer. Like, people are going to be coming to you. You've already got an online brand. You are, if you've not already hit it, you're getting to that point. I would argue, and I frequently make the argument, that you are way more stable than where you were, and even working for, let's say, the city, which I'd imagine there's not too much turnover. It sounds like the only way for you to sounds like you were waiting basically the person above you to retire. There's not too much turnover. Do you think you're more stable now, or you were more stable when you worked for, at that point, for the city?
Oh, much more stable now, for sure. Sure, municipal jobs sort of come and go, but there's also the politics game that you play, and it's a whole, I'm sure you've seen Parks and Rec before. So
yeah.
That was my workplace. I can't watch the show anymore because I lived a lot of the episodes. So as you might imagine, there's a lot of shenanigans that go on, and you never know what will happen. But I actually do think part of the reason I'm more secure now is something that I learned looking at Hollywood, which is that Hollywood studios don't employ the actors. They don't employ the directors. They have some producers who are sort of the traffic cops, and they bring together money and people and all the rest of it. And but they don't employ, the stage hands or all the rest of it. There's all of these little units that all come together to make amazing films or TV shows or all the rest of it. And I think the same is happening in marketing particularly. I think there's too much good talent out in the world that works for themselves anymore, that companies cannot rely on hiring internally. There's a graphic designer a block away from me. He does the graphic content for basically every major EDM festival in the world. Do you think somebody's going to be able to hire him? No.
They can't afford
let
it.
alone the fact of the salary or whatever. He likes the flexibility. He likes the freedom. He has all of these clients. They continue to come back to him because he does good work. So it's that same sort of security that I feel in this, which is, sure, the ramp up's a little bit hard. It has its own challenges. But now that it's here, it's, okay, what studio, what producer do I have to get in front of to hire me, the person, and how can I build a brand around that or become recognized for a particular style, right? You don't hire Brad Pitt for the same kinds of movies in every single movie. He probably is at the top of a lot of call sheets for other reasons, but at the end of the day, casting directors have their own vision about who's filling what roles. And the same is going for all of these companies. There's always going to be internal talent, I think. And I think at different scales, different arrangements make sense. But if you have expertise and you have a particular way of tackling the problem, there's so much more security being a free agent and navigating the studio model between different companies, because you'll always be in demand.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And even the top talent that's internal, they're all freelancing on the side anyway.
Oh, exactly, right?
That's honestly what makes me laugh the most. Oh no, we need internal talent. They're all freelancing on the side anyway. Half of them have consulting gigs. They just don't want to that. That to me is the best talent is freelance talent right now, 100%. Because any marketer that figures out how to sell and how to sell themselves and how to stand on their own 2 feet and how to file a tax return and how to take a deduction and how to figure out the benefits. If you can figure out literally those 3 things, you suddenly go, I could make triple what I'm making right now, making 150 grand a year. I could make triple that if I was a consultant. And absolutely, you're going to go and do that. And I've always said, since I started Catalyst, if I'd come from a metadata, if I'd come from a Slack, a Salesforce, as a VP of marketing or something, imagine the size of Catalyst now. 18 months ago, nobody had heard of me, and we've still managed to grow crazy in the last 18 months. So if you are a top marketer and you're looking to get into this, I mean, the ramp time for you to, and first of all, your network is, I mean, just pick up the phone. Like it's I wish I had your connections when I was starting. It really is.
Right.
You know, I think a lot of people just lack the confidence to go on and be able to do that. And that for me it's the saddest thing to watch a marketer lack their confidence. And unfortunately, what we're seeing right now with the layoffs that are happening, with everything that's going on in the economy, is a lot of marketers are figuring out for the first time, especially if you're under 30 years old, you know, a lot of this is the first time you're figuring this out as a marketer in your professional career of, shit, I was reliant on that company, but this is what happens when you're reliant on somebody else. And maybe it's because I'm not a good marketer. Maybe the reason I got laid off is because I'm not a good marketer. Maybe I shouldn't be in this field. Maybe I should go and do something else. And it's that imposter syndrome is absolutely rampant right now, especially in the marketing field. And that's where, you know, I'm really fighting right now to say, it's not you. It's the environment. It's you that set yourself up for failure by relying solely on one company and one CEO and one VP of marketing and one individual to decide your outcome. And when you do that, you take that risk. And to me, it's the riskiest thing you can do. You know, I think if you figure out how to do this for yourself, it's a game changer, absolute game changer. And you know, a lot of the hope with this podcast is to shed light on just how, not simple, but just how applicable the lessons that individuals like yourself that have been through this, you know, how you can take and hopefully inspire digital marketers to be able to do this, because there's so many marketers that are struggling right now. There's so many, everybody that's struggling right now, but, you know, my world is very much marketing, and I really want to take some time to inspire marketers to start their own thing, because there isn't a better time right now than 2023 getting into a recession, because like I said, everyone that's hiring digital marketing for 200 grand a year right now, they got hiring freezes, but they don't have hiring freezes on hiring me right now. And I can tell you that with real experience. And if you're now applying for that $200,000 a year position, guess what? Now you're competing against me and my team of marketers, where we have graphic designers, we have video editors, we have high performance specialists. You're now competing with us. And I can tell you with confidence that and every marketing position that's posted by a B2B SaaS company right now, you're competing against us. So the competition levels for these jobs is crazy. And I see the model going much more fractional. And I think as a marketer, you need to be aware of that and start to make the changes to be able to capitalize on that, or you're going to struggle in the next 12 months.
And especially if you think about, like, if you're a really talented copywriter, for example, you can probably find 3 or 4 other copywriters who are as good as you or pretty close. So why not call them up and say, hey, I'm going to go sell this company on some copywriting services. Do you want in? Yeah. And build something off of that. And I guarantee the same formula can work for paid ads or anything else in digital marketing or brand strategy for that matter. Because companies aren't thinking about, oh gosh, it is very rare in my experience to hear a VP of marketing or a CEO say, what I really need is a individual person in my office to write copy for my brand. What they usually say is, I need a new website page and we need to find somebody who can help write it for us. Yeah. Right? So it's a problem. It's not about the staffing solution. It's they've got a problem and you can solve it for them. Or paid ads or anything else, like any sort of expertise you have, you can offer. And to your point, there's a lot of money for solving problems and not a lot of money for full-time positions right now. Yeah,
you're expensive. You're expensive, and it's a hard sell at the moment. What advice would you give to someone who is starting their own business right now or starting to freelance?
I had sort of previewed earlier, I think like the cash flow management skill is really key. And I think if you can master cash flow, you're fine. But let me add something else since we've already talked about that. I think really my piece of advice is go out and call 10 people in your network who are not your mom and are maybe from previous employers, but are people who you could sell to, but even sometimes maybe people who are just smart and know something about the industry, even if they're not a buyer. And say, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? What's your advice? What do you see? And start gathering that information. First of all, it's a much better conversation than saying, would you be interested in buying my services?
Yeah.
Secondly, there's a lot of interesting things I have learned when I ask somebody to put up a mirror to me, because then they'll throw something back to me and say, have you thought about this? And I'll be like, shit, I have not thought about that. That's a great question. And there's all sorts of interesting insights and questions that your network of professionals, people who are smart and intelligent about the industry, can offer to you. Because armed with that knowledge, it makes you a better seller because you can have more interesting conversations with prospects. I think it makes you a better leader because you can actually build a business around some interesting insights in the industry or interesting pieces of information you learned from these 10 or 12 or however many people. And I think it makes you a better provider or a marketer because now you understand what's really interesting to these folks. Like if I'm going to sell paid ad services or paid ad optimization, like is that really what they are asking about? Or they're thinking like, man, you know, the number of the amount of traffic, this is a great example, the amount of traffic that we've gotten from our paid ads has just dropped so much in the last 30 days. Like if you could then take that little soundbite, turn it back around and send some emails on that, like, hey, has your traffic declined in the last 30 days off your paid ads? I can help. That is far more interesting than I help optimize your paid ads. Is there any work for me at your company that I can sell to? Like, like using that natural language is a huge advantage in the market. So I would say go call 10 people and ask them about the industry and talk about what you're thinking about.
I think that's great advice, and I think it's the advice nobody wants to hear, but everybody needs because no one wants to pick up the phone. So I think that is
I know, right?
Phenomenal advice, and you say hold up the mirror and to yourself. You know, ask people for feedback. And again, I was on a podcast recently. Said, "What's your advice?" This thing right here. It's pick it up. Literally, pick it up. You have it for a reason, and it's something that every, I think, marketer is afraid to do. So that, I think, is phenomenal advice. I will include links to your LinkedIn, to the website on the description of this podcast, and we're going to be chopping this up when we're distributing this all over LinkedIn. But just want to thank you again, Morgan, for your time today. It was really a pleasure catching up with you, kind of jamming out with you, and learning more about your story, building your own company, and some of the, obviously, the success and some of the pitfalls that you've had to navigate. It really was a great episode.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here, Chris. I appreciate it.
And that concludes this episode. If you have any questions, please head into the comments where you'll find all of the available links. If you have any questions on our sponsors, all the links will be in the description. Please stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks.